Have you ever felt uncomfortable driving alone at night? Lonely roads, pitch darkness, and eerie silence can hold many unexpected mysteries. The following 10 stories are terrifying experiences of nighttime drivers that they will never forget. Prepare yourself to feel the tension and fear that will probably make you think twice before taking your next night drive. If you're scared, don't listen to these stories. And here are 10 scary nighttime driving stories that will make you want to stay home forever.
Knock knock! Who's there? Your nightmare! I've been watching you. La 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 la.
Story 1. Cornfield Demons. It was a quiet night, an eerie silence that only exists on lonely country roads. My father and I were driving through a cornfield when I saw them 2 red dots glowing ominously in the cornfield, offsetting our car. "Dad, did you see that?" I whispered, fear creeping into my voice. He turned his head, a calm look on his face. "It's a cornfield demon," he said firmly. "Just stay in the car and you'll be fine." My heart raced as he pulled over to check the tires. Panic surged as he stepped out, a red light approaching. Shadows danced between the cornstalks, and I was sure I saw a lurking figure. When he got back in, his calm demeanor was eerie. I never knew if it was a lesson or a real encounter, but from then on I avoided cornfields at night. Story 2. Blizzard Nightmare. Driving through a snowstorm on Montana's McDonald Trail is a dangerous task, but that night, it became a nightmare etched into my memory. I was following a gray Toyota Tundra through a snowstorm, the driver seemingly unfazed by the treacherous conditions. As the road got steeper, I slowed down, losing sight of the truck. A few minutes later, I saw fresh tire tracks that veered off the road. I pulled over, peered into the ravine and saw the truck, a mangled wreck, engulfed in flames 300 meters below. I immediately called 911. The driver survived but suffered severe burns. The eerie silence of the snow-covered landscape, broken only by the crackling of the flames, still haunts me. The incident served as a grim reminder that no vehicle is invincible to nature's fury. Story 3. The Thousand Bend Trap. In the 1980s, driving from Morelia to Ciudad Hidalgo in Mexico offered 2 routes, the National Road or the infamous Mil Cumbres with its endless twists and turns. My grandfather preferred Mil Cumbres, which was beautiful and quiet despite its remoteness. On a dark night, we embarked on this route, the car's headlights piercing the fading gloom. About 45 minutes into the journey, darkness enveloped us. Suddenly, my grandfather slowed down the car. From the back seat, I saw a tree trunk blocking the road. Without hesitation, he made a quick U-turn. As we turned a corner, I saw figures emerging from the trees, armed with flashlights and guns. They were setting up an ambush. My grandfather stepped on the accelerator, and I was thrown backwards in my seat. We got away, but the sight of those shadowy figures in the rearview mirror remained etched in my memory. That was our last trip through Mil Cumbres. Story 4. The Haunted Highway. One night, a local acquaintance came across a gruesome scene on the highway. A Jeep had gone into a ditch and overturned, its wheels still turning. He was the first to arrive on the scene, and without hesitation, he called 911 before rushing to the ditch. There, he found the driver, badly injured and thrown from the vehicle, but still alive. He embraced the dying man, offering comfort in his final moments. It was only the next day, amidst a haze of shock and grief, that he learned that the victim was his cousin, unrecognizable in the dark and broken state. The realization that he had embraced his own blood as his life drifted away still gives him goosebumps. Story 5. The horror of a hit-and-run. 15 years ago, my friend and I were walking back home at around 2 a.m. The quiet street was suddenly disturbed by a car speeding and making a wild turn. As the car sped past us, we watched in horror as it mounted the sidewalk and hit a pedestrian. The impact was so loud. In the days before cell phones, we ran to the nearest house, banging on the door until someone answered. We frantically called the police, but the image of the lifeless body under the streetlight is seared into my mind. The night air was filled with an eerie silence after such a violent incident, and the memory still haunts my dreams, a chilling reminder of how quickly life can change. Story 6. The Persistent Stalker. It was 8 p.m. on I-70 in Colorado, and I had just pulled over at a gas station to refuel before continuing on to Utah. While pumping gas, I noticed a group of attractive women on the other side of the gas station. Nearby, a man in his late 40s stood, staring intently at them, seemingly oblivious to anything else. After buying some snacks inside, I came out to find the women's car and the old man's truck gone. Feeling uneasy, I decided to take a short nap at the gas station before continuing my journey. A few hours later, I stopped at another gas station and saw the same women refueling and eating at picnic tables. The man's truck was nowhere to be seen, but something was not right. I watched them leave, and shortly after, I saw the same man's truck parked nearby. He left again soon after the women left. My curiosity piqued. I followed at a distance, only to see the man's truck behind them with its high beams. The women pulled over, apparently to let the man pass, but he stopped too. With growing nervousness, I slowed down, keeping an eye on the situation. 10 minutes later, the women pulled over again, and the man's truck continued to drive past them. Thinking it was all over, I continued on my way. However, a mile down the road, I saw the truck parked on the side of the road, and the man inside watching the road. Fearing for the safety of the women, I stopped and waited. Before long, they passed by, and the man returned to follow them. This was no coincidence. We were in the middle of nowhere, and the man's behavior was too suspicious. I called the police and reported the situation. 15 minutes later, they stopped the man. Maybe I overreacted, but sometimes it's better to be safe than sorry. Story 7. Highway Ghosts. The night I dropped my girlfriend off after watching the Mothman Prophecies shouldn't have been scary. The movie had its scary moments, but nothing too scary. However, as I was driving down a dark and empty highway at 3 a.m., something disturbing happened. On the way, there was a bend with no lights, just a pitch-black stretch of road. As my car rounded the bend, the headlights highlighted a man in a black raincoat walking on the side of the road. At that moment, it felt very strange, and when the light shone on him, he turned around and looked directly into my eyes. My heart was pounding as his gaze seemed to pierce the night. The encounter only lasted a few seconds, but it left me shaken. It wasn't paranormal, but the timing and her haunting gaze were enough to give me goosebumps. Story 8. Floating Ball. Delivering pizza late at night has many strange occurrences, but there was one night that stood out among the rest. It was close to midnight, and I was driving back to the store through a small, quiet neighborhood. Up ahead, I saw something strange, a bright, perfectly round object, hovering about 6 feet off the ground. Curiosity overcame my fear as I approached. It wasn't moving, just hovering there, glowing eerily. I got out of the car, the silence of the night amplifying my heartbeat. As I got closer, I reached out to touch it, half expecting it to vanish. To my surprise, it was a balloon, a shiny birthday balloon that reflected the light of the street lamp, making it look otherworldly. My fear turned to laughter, but the strange sight in the middle of the night made me wary of future encounters. Story 9: Intruders in the Night. Living in a safe country and city, I never expected to face danger close to home. As a photographer, I often returned home between 2 and 4 a.m. My parents' house was on a hill with a parking lot below, a quiet area, and there was no one around after midnight. On one particularly cold night, around -5 degrees Celsius, I parked my car and grabbed my gear when I saw a figure moving between my neighbor's cars. "What are you doing?" I shouted. The man, wearing only shorts and a t-shirt, turned to me. His pupils were dilated, and he looked very thin. Fear surged as he approached aggressively. "Go home," I shouted, trying to sound stern. He mumbled an agreement and walked away. I saw him cross the street and start stalking the other houses. I called the police, who came and detained him when he refused to show identification. The incident left me shaken, a reminder that danger can lurk even in the safest of places. Story 10: The Shadows of the Desert. Have you ever wondered what exactly lurks in the darkness of an open road at night? Sometimes, it's not just your imagination playing tricks on you. This is a story from a trip that forever changed my perspective on night driving. I've driven across this country more times than I can count, and I've heard plenty of stories about eerie shadowy figures haunting the highways. But nothing prepared me for the night when I encountered a running shadow. It was the end of a grueling 12-hour drive through the desolate desert. There was no moon that night, and not a single light on the horizon, only the weak beam of my truck's headlights illuminating the road ahead. The desert around me was pitch black, absorbing every ounce of light. As I drove on in the darkness, I began to see shadowy figures darting along the perimeter of my vision. They moved very fast, some on 2 legs, others on 4. My mind raced with memories of scary stories about desert spirits and evil entities. Every instinct told me not to look, not to recognize them. If I didn't see them, they couldn't hurt me, right? I forced my eyes to stay focused on the road ahead, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the steering wheel. I closed the windows and turned on the radio, trying to drown out the fear. The shadows didn't relent. They kept pace with my truck, darting in and out of the darkness, whispering threats I could almost hear over the music. After what felt like an eternity, the shadows began to fade, disappearing one by one as I approached a small town, the first sign of civilization I'd seen in hours. The lights of the town became a pleasant sight, and I finally felt my spine relax, the frozen fear slowly melting away. I had faced all kinds of dangers on the road: carjackers, robbers, even people jumping out in front of my truck on winding mountain roads. But nothing could match the terror I felt that night in the desert. The fear was so intense, it felt like my spine was trying to break out of my body, rippling and writhing like it had a mind of its own. The experience taught me that sleep deprivation mixed with the isolation of the desert does strange things to the mind. But I still couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows were more than a trick of the light. These stories of nighttime driving horrors are enough to make anyone think twice about driving at night. The unknown lurks in the shadows, and sometimes, darkness is more than just the absence of light. So, the next time you get behind the wheel at night, remember these stories and think twice before venturing into the unknown.
Knock knock. Who's there? Your nightmare! I've been watching you. La 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 la.